Okay, and again, first of many that we'll do together. Good afternoon. I'm Michael Hutchison. You're watching Credibility TV, brought to you by the good folks at Dun & Bradstreet Credibility Corp. Thanks for joining us. I'm pleased to have Stephen MR Covey, the New York Times bestselling author, on today's show. Welcome, Stephen. How are you?
I'm doing terrific, Hutch. It's great to be on the show with you.
And it's nice to see you. Stephen, I've just read yours and your partner, Greg Link's, and my good friend, Greg, your latest book titled Smart Trust, Creating Prosperity, Energy, and Joy in a Low-Trust World. But first of all, congratulations on an outstanding book. The Speed of Trust, I thought, was awesome and wonderfully written, but I think this time you guys have knocked it out of the park.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, Stephen, your message is very timely. Unfortunately, Stephen, the world that we're in, the news is drenched with stories of declining trust. Yeah. We have a real trust deficit, and that's a global we, I might add, Stephen. And when you think about the trust in our institutions and companies and in our leaders are all way down. And you and I don't need to surrender to mass cynicism, but Stephen, it's worth asking the first question: how do you know whom to trust?
Yeah, it's really a great question, especially because we're operating in such a low trust world. And then that's why on the subtitle of the book, it's doing all these things, creating prosperity, energy, and joy in a low trust world, because in a low trust world, it is hard to know who you can trust. And so the danger is that a lot of people walk around and they're very reticent to trust anybody because they've seen people get burned. They've seen all the scandals, all the problems that have taken place, and they start to question whether you can trust anybody. And so they lead out with suspicion. The danger with that is people respond back with suspicion, and you can find yourself perpetuating a vicious downward cycle. But at the same time, if someone goes the other direction where they trust too much, and they're too trusting, and they move into the realm of what we might call blind trust, where they're gullible, and they get burned that way. And because at some point, someone's going to take advantage of you in a low trust world. So the two extremes of blind trust on one side, where you're gullible, and distrust on the other side, where you're suspicious of everyone because of the fact that you can't trust some, those aren't the best solutions in this low trust world. A better solution, and really answering your question of who do you know who you can trust, is to operate with what Greg and I call smart trust. And the whole idea behind smart trust is this. It's not saying that you're going to trust people, but it's saying that you want to trust people if possible, because that's a better way to operate. But you got to be smart about it. You have to assess the situation. You have to assess the risk involved. And you have to assess the credibility of the people involved. And so it's that kind of combination of blending those dimensions. First, a propensity to trust, a high propensity to trust, that is an inclination, a bias, a desire to trust, that flows out of your heart. And you blend that with equally high or strong analysis. And by analysis, I mean assessment of situation, of risk, and of credibility. That flows out of your head. And you blend both the heart and the head to give you judgment. And the heart opens you up to the possibilities. You have a propensity to trust, a bias. The mind also makes sure that you're smart about it, that you're not giving it out blindly or foolishly and just get burned. But when you combine the two, you have better judgment and you learn when to trust and sometimes maybe when not to trust. Maybe because either the risk is too great and or the credibility of the people is very, very low or decidedly untrustworthy. And in those cases, you want to be very careful about it. So let me give you one illustration of a small business owner that has become a larger business now because of great success. Ted Morgan was the CEO of Skyhook Technologies, wireless technology company that focused on location finding devices. And so he was trying to get his technology embedded into phones. He was trying to do a deal with Apple, trying to do a deal with Nokia, with other cellular phone companies. And at the time, this was in late December timeframe of 2007. They were an unknown, and they had venture capital money, but no customers yet. They had good technology, no customers. And they were working on a deal with Apple to get into the iPhone. And Ted Morgan himself was working directly with Steve Jobs. And it came down to, they almost had a deal. And Steve Jobs calls up Ted and says, hey, Ted, you know we're close to a deal. We want to do the deal with you. We've got our Macworld right on top of us coming out, and we want to be able to model your technology at Macworld. But to do that, we need your code so we can model this. And Ted Morgan is standing, he's in his conference room with his executive team, and he cups the phone and he says to his team, hey, it's Steve Jobs. He wants our code. He wants our code. And everyone on the team says, no, don't give it to him. Kind of like, this is too risky. And he says, so Ted gets on and says, well, Steve, as you know, that code is our intellectual property. It's all we have. And we've never given that to anyone. That's all we have. And Steve says, Ted, I know that. I know that. We'll honor it. You're just going to have to trust me. So here's the question. Ted asked your question. Can I trust? Can I trust Steve Jobs? Can I trust Apple on this? And he might have had many people say, don't do it, it's too risky. But they had to move fast. They didn't have time to get a deal done. The whole thing was happening in real time. And he had to make that decision. Well, he decided that given the fact that they were established, their company, even though they didn't have customers yet, they had a clear technology. He was dealing with Steve Jobs himself, Apple. They felt like he was going to trust him. And he extended the trust to him. And just very few days after the Macworld took place, they were invited to it. And Steve Jobs gets up there and he says, now with location finding devices, technology, we're working with two companies, Google and a company called Skyhook Wireless.
Wow.
And this is in front of Macworld. You know, this is the big announcement, Steve Jobs. And he goes, let me talk about Skyhook first. First billing over Google. And then he goes on and with animation in his voice, he describes their technology and how it works. And then he ends it with this. Isn't that cool? That's really cool. Well, Ted Morgan called it the biggest publicity event any customer, any company could have in their history. It not only put them on the map, they got established from that, and they went with all kinds of business that followed. Not only with Apple, they did the deal with Apple, but with many, many other companies. But it was a trust question. And I asked Ted Morgan later, I said, well, what would have happened if you would have said to Steve, you know what, I can't move forward. I can't trust you here. He said, you know what, you never know. He goes, but I don't think that Steve would have done the deal. I personally don't think he would have done it. He had other options, other choices. When he asked me to trust him, I think that was a test of, can I trust this partner? And I responded, I felt like I could. I know there was a risk in it, but I felt like the risk was pretty minor because our intellectual property had been established. It was clear he was going to honor it. He told me he would honor it, and I felt like I could trust him, and I was right. He goes, but that was a judgment, see? And there was a little bit of risk, but there would also been a risk to not do it. Because had he said, no, Steve, we can't, Steve might have moved on and found another opportunity with someone that maybe could trust him. So that's why there's no one size fits all, is there? It's a balancing act. It's judgment. And in that case, Ted Morgan felt like that was the right judgment. And it looks like it was based upon what happened afterwards. And sometimes we might be wrong with our judgments, but that's the key thing for business people everywhere is kind of assessing who to trust, who not to trust, and to be smart about it. And we call it smart trust. It gives you the best of both worlds, where you're open to the possibilities because you have a high propensity to trust, but you're also mindful of the risk and the consequences. You have strong analysis. The combination of those two help you determine what's good judgment of when to trust and maybe when not to trust.
Stephen, you and I have both been students of human development and human motivation. You with your father and Covey Leadership Center and myself with Tony Robbins. In your book, Smart Trust, you write that being trusted is the most compelling and sustainable form of human motivation. Please explain.
Well, here's the whole idea behind that, Hutch. Most people want to be trusted. They long for it. It's a great way of engaging people. Nothing engages someone like being trusted. Nothing disengages someone like not being trusted. And most people respond well to trust. They're inspired by it. It brings out the best in them. It actually does motivate them because they want to prove themselves worthy of the trust, deserving of the trust. Now, I also know there's always a few people that might take advantage and abuse it. But they're in the small minority. The vast majority of the people are inspired by trust. And it truly, they want to, it brings out the best in them. They want to prove that the trust that you gave them was justified and to rise to the occasion. And that is motivation. That is compelling, is to be trusted. I remember Robert Galvin Jr., the former CEO of Motorola, and who was handed the reins of that by his father, who had been the CEO. And he says, my father gave me a very stern discipline. He trusted me. And I had to prove myself worthy of that trust. And see, rather than kind of taking advantage of that and just coasting, no, it brings out the best in him. It brought out the best in him. It inspires him. It's a tough discipline. And it does that for most people. But what has happened is there's always a few people that abuse it, take advantage of it. And so for many, sometimes because of the few that abuse the trust, they get to where they say, you know what, it's just too risky to trust people because you might get burned. And again, smart trust says you got to be aware of that. There's the possibility of that. But for the vast majority of people, they want to be trusted. They'll respond well to trust. It will motivate them. It will inspire them. It will bring out the best in them. They'll want to prove the trust justified, and they'll perform better for you. And so you just have to make sure that you have clear expectations. That makes it smart. So it's not just a blind trust where, I trust you, do whatever you want. No, it's, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's our goals. Here's our objectives. And I'm going to trust you to be able to accomplish that. So you have clear expectations and you have clear accountability to the trust that you're being given. So when someone is looking at, should I allow my people to telecommute, work from their home? That's a trust question, isn't it? And what's the nature of the work being done? Is that possible? Where they don't need to necessarily be together in a common setting? And can I trust them? Well, when you have clear expectations and clear accountability, that makes it smart. So it's not just, okay, work from your home, do whatever you want. It's, sure, work from your home. Here's our objectives. Here's our goals. Here's how we know how we're going to do it. Here's our accountability process. That makes it smart. And most people really respond to that, and they perform better. Productivity goes up. We saw this happen with BestBuy.com, the online version of Best Buy, where the people were saying that they said, hey, why do we have to come to a common call center and work these common hours when this is an online company? Let us work where we want and when we want, as long as we do our work well and as long as we get it done on time, according to the standards and such. Give us some autonomy. Trust us. And the management thought about it and they said, you know what? They're right. Let's have clear expectations. Let's have clear accountability, and let's extend them trust. Well, they did that. What happened was, in a short period of time, after extending that trust, their productivity increased by 35%. Nothing else changed, except they were allowed to do the work where they wanted, when they wanted. They were trusted. And people responded to the trust, and the productivity increased 35%. It brings out the best in people. It inspires them. And we can't let the few that abuse the trust define for us the many that are inspired and motivated by it. And that's too often what's happened. We've allowed the few to define the many, and that's costing us greatly. Instead, the better approach is to focus on the many and then to make exceptions of the few and isolate them and weed them out at some point if they don't respond to it. But let's focus on the fact that trust is compelling, and it does motivate, it engages, it inspires.
Stephen, do you believe trust is the new currency of the U.S. economy?
Absolutely. We have money, of course, and money is a currency. But in a global, interdependent world, connected world, with social media, the internet, all these different technologies where we're so connected. Yes, money is a currency, but trust is the new currency. In a sense, trust is the new money. It's your reputation, your brand. It precedes you. It goes in front of you. This is especially important in a low trust world because like we had talked about earlier, in a low trust world, it's hard to know who you can trust. And if you build a reputation, a brand, a currency of being trusted, what an advantage that is for that person to operate with a reputation of trust in a low trust world. What an advantage for a team or for a group or for a business to be known for high trust in a world in which it's hard to know who you can trust. It's a huge asset, a huge advantage. It is a new currency. Now, in effect, it's always been there. It's always mattered. But I think it's even more important than ever before today because of the fact that we're operating in such a low trust world where the trust has gone down in society at large, in institutions, in business, in education, in healthcare, in government, in media, in political parties. In most institutions, it's gone down. And in that low trust world, people are wondering, can I trust this person? Can I trust that person? They become more cynical, more suspicious, more guarded, careful, cautious. And to have a reputation, to have a brand of being trusted is such an extraordinary asset. It is a new currency. And the other reason it makes it such a great currency is that it makes you better at everything else that you need to do. It doesn't eliminate the need to do the other things. You still got to do them. It's just that trust makes you better at it. It increases your ability to collaborate. And that's so important today because everything is around collaboration. But without trust, you have a hard time really collaborating. You might coordinate with someone if you don't trust each other. But to really collaborate requires trust. It's trust that turns a group of people into a team. It's trust that turns a vendor or a supplier into a true partner. And without trust, there's still a vendor supplier. So trust takes you where you're at and it multiplies it. Greg and I call it a great performance multiplier. It makes you better at everything else that you need to do. That is a currency. In fact, there's not a more important currency than the currency of trust and being trusted in today's low trust world.
One of the things that I appreciated the most about your book is it wasn't academic, it wasn't theoretical, it was real world. So some of the many examples that you brought up in your book were, for example, PepsiCo's chairman and CEO Indra Nooyi wrote that the following was probably the most important advice, the best advice she had ever received, and that was to always assume positive intent. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated the story about Google, the trust that they extend to their team to be able to invest, about 20% of their time to focusing on new projects, ways to take the organization and themselves to the next level. And you brought up, of course, BestBuy.com, who I understand doesn't have schedules and doesn't have meetings and offers and extends trust, through telecommuting and flex hours. But my question, Stephen, is can these examples work in a small or medium-sized business as they work for these larger companies that we've just mentioned?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. They work really at any level. And in fact, in some ways, they might even work better and faster in the small and medium size just because you can implement it so profoundly and have the effect be so real. Let me give you an illustration if I could. I have a small business that made a decision to trust. And that's a bicycle shop called Zane's Bikes, Zane Cycles. They're out of Connecticut, and they have a nice location, and they've grown. They've been in business for almost 30 years, and they've grown about 21% compound annual growth rate every year. So great track record. Today, they're like the third largest bike shop in the United States. So a great small business that is doing well and has intensely loyal customers. And Chris Zane, the owner, he made a decision that he was going to trust his customers. And he was going to build high trust because he felt like if he could build high trust with the customers, that they would be loyal to him. They would stay with him. They'd give him the benefit of the doubt, and that they would refer business to him. And that's exactly what has happened. He's built a great relationship of trust with his customers. And as a result of that, they're intensely loyal. They buy everything from him, and they refer all kinds of business to him, family, friends, colleagues, and so forth, that they say, hey, you got to go to Zane's. Buy it from Zane's. Chris Zane will take care of you. But here's an example of the type of trust that Chris Zane gives out. When a customer comes through and says, hey, I like to test drive this bike, I take it for a test drive. You know, the answer is, of course. Now, most bike shops do that. They let you to a test drive. But most bike shops would say, hey, yeah, that's fine. Just leave your wallet or leave your purse or leave a credit card, leave your phone, you know, and bring the bike back. And so the customer might even ask Chris Zane, hey, do I need to leave you a credit card or my wallet or my purse? And he says, no, just have a great ride. We trust you. Just come back, but we trust you. And someone said to him, well, you're crazy, you know, because someone might run off with that bike. And sometimes these bikes can be $1,000, $2,000 maybe. And he says, you know, why would I want to start a new customer relationship on the premise of distrust? I don't trust you. I got to, you know, you leave this collateral with me, verify. He goes, I would rather start it on the premise of I do trust you. And in fact, I trust you in extraordinary ways. And that's going to be the nature of a relationship all the way through. And he goes, I know there's some risk in this, but in the long run, it will pay off because the little that I lose will come back to me many-fold more in all that I gain with intense loyalty and with referral business left and right. And that's exactly what has happened. He loses a few bikes here and there over time. In fact, last year, he lost 5 bikes. But he sold 5,000 bikes, 99.9875%. And he thinks he's selling a whole lot more bikes than he would be if he didn't take this type of action and other actions like that just say, we're going to choose to trust our customer, believing it will come back to us. And it has come back to him many, many times over. And so this is practical. It's real. Now, that doesn't mean you still don't use judgment. Chris Zane used judgment. He knew he was going to lose a bike or 2 or 3 or 4. But he also knew that he was going to gain this intense customer loyalty. And that is the kind of and that would more than offset the minor losses that he would have. You'd almost see that as a marketing cost. And so these are the kind of decisions that you can make. I've seen it work the other direction where someone is distrustful. You saw a small business where new owner came in. This was a sunglasses shop, and they sold sunglasses. The new owner looked at the profit and loss statement and saw that, hey, they were losing like from shrinkage or, you know, theft of inventory. It was like 2% of sales, pretty significant. And so he said, gosh, someone's stealing from me. It's either my customers or my employees, or maybe both. And so he says, I'm going to stop that, make sure they can't steal from me. I'm not going to trust them. You know, he didn't say those words, but that's the actions that he followed. And he didn't trust his people. And here's what he did: is he put little on the display racks where the sunglasses were displayed. He tied down every pair of glasses so that you could not pull them off the rack, thinking, you know, I'm going to make sure no one takes these, or at least it would be a big ordeal to take it. Well, the good news is he did cut his shrinkage. It went from like 2% down to 0.2%. But guess what else went down dramatically? His sales.
Sure.
Because the customers couldn't take off the sunglasses off the rack to try them on. And why do people buy sunglasses? They buy them when they try them on and see how cool they look in them and how good they look in them. And without being able to try them on, they didn't buy as many. And his sales went down in half. See, so the not trust is not the answer. Trusting is a good answer. You just got to be smart about it. And so you're finding that balance all the time. But this is practical. It works. Tony Hsieh and Zappos, today they're not a small business, but they were just a decade ago. They started from nothing and in a decade became $1 billion company. But from the beginning, what helped him build this business was Tony Hsieh made 2 decisions. He said, first, I'm going to trust my customers. And second, I'm going to trust my people. With his customers, this is Zappos, so it's online shoes. They sell more than shoes now. It's clothing and the like and other things. But they started with women's shoes, online shoes, and they offered free shipping both ways to the customers. That's trust. That's saying, hey, customer, I trust you. If you asked me to send you 10 pair, I trust that you're probably serious about buying some shoes and it's worth it. Otherwise, that shipping's going to get pretty expensive when it's free shipping both ways. But he trusted his customer. And guess what? The customer responded back. They didn't abuse the trust he gave to him. They didn't take advantage of him. And they liked me buying and working with Zappos and Tony Hsieh. And they bought shoes and they bought other things and they grew dramatically. He also trusted his people. He set up his call centers where the people don't have scripts. And they're not put on time clocks to try to efficiently get the customer off. They're told, make the customer happy. Use your judgment. Use good judgment. Make the customer happy and delight them. And no scripts. We trust you. And people respond to that. And they respond to a whole host of other ways that he shows that he trusts his people. And they went from a small business into a very large business, became a billion-dollar company, and got bought out by Amazon, where they're still autonomous today, but they work in that great environment. So this works for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses. And the premise is not a blind trust, just indiscriminately with no expectations. No, a smart trust with clear expectations, clear accountability. But you got to lead out with trust. You got to start with trust. That's what leaders do. That's what great business people do. That's what great entrepreneurs do.
The call to action I took from your book was the whole idea of creating a wave, creating a renaissance of trust. What final nuggets of wisdom, what advice would you give to our viewing audience of owners, of entrepreneurs to create this wave, this renaissance of trust today, Stephen?
I would say this. The main advice would be to start with yourself. Start with self. In other words, don't wait on the world to become trustworthy before you lead out with trust, because you might be waiting forever. But what we need are people everywhere saying, really answering two questions. The first question they answer is this: do I trust myself? Do I trust myself? And the answer affirmatively, yes. Because if you don't trust yourself, you'll have a hard time building trust with others, sustaining it, growing it. Because at some point that distrust of self will manifest itself outward in the relationships. And so how can you increase the renaissance of trust? Start by trusting yourself and building that self-trust. And the best way I've learned to do that is to learn to make and keep commitments to yourself. It's funny, the data is overwhelming. The best way to build trust with another person is to make him a commitment and keep it. Make another commitment and keep it. You want to build trust with a customer? Make a commitment, keep it. Make another commitment, keep it. Repeat that process. Make, keep, repeat. Make, keep, repeat. Becomes an upward cycle. You can build trust. You can build it fast. Well, guess what? That's also the best way to build trust with yourself. So learn to make and keep commitments to yourself. And too often with ourselves, we overpromise and underdeliver, or we make commitments we don't keep or don't even intend to keep. But treat ourselves with the same respect. And you build that self-trust. And with that self-trust in place, now you're far more in a position to build trust externally and with other people and with teams and relationships. So that's the first question. Do I trust myself? The second question is, do I give to others a person they can trust? Do I give to my team a leader they can trust? Do I give to my partners a partner they can trust? Do I give to my customers a company they can trust? And that's saying, again, I'm not going to wait on everyone else changing. I'm going to lead out smartly with trust by giving others someone that they can trust. And then I can be the ripple effect. You know, the drop of water goes down, the waves go out. I'll be that first wave. I'll be that first ripple that begins to create other ripples that follow. And I don't wait on anybody else. I lead out with it, with myself. I trust myself, and I give to others a person they can trust. And by doing that, it's amazing how you then put in place this ripple effect. And you become that, because now in all your relationships, you're in a position to build trust. And as you interact with teams, you can build trust on those teams. And then as those teams interact with others, you can build trust. If you're running a small business, you can build a high trust business that builds trust with customers and partners and suppliers. And you watch how that will then ripple out. We saw a construction company that works with all kinds of subcontractors. They built high trust. They had an alternative approach to building. This is Dalton Companies out of Canada. An alternative approach to building. It was all based upon trust, because typically in the building industry, is all based on low trust, adversarialism, people not trusting each other. And they said, we're going to lead out. We're going to change this industry. And so they started with themselves. They trusted themselves, and they gave to their partners a firm that they could trust. And what happened is those subcontractors, the trades, they had a different experience with Dalton than they did with the other general contractors that they worked with. And they contrasted, and they felt like, gosh, we like working with Dalton. It's far better than we worked elsewhere. But see, Dalton began to build a ripple effect, not only with themselves, but with their trade partners and suppliers. And they changed the expectations of those trade partners to where now when they started working with other people, they said, hey, we've seen a better way to work together. And it's to start with trust. And so the ripple effect continued, and it will continue more and more as they work out in the marketplace. So it's always inside out. And that's inspiring, because all of us can do something about that. And the best way to change our world is to change ourselves first, and then to change those relationships in our team and our group. And Gandhi was right when he said, let us become the change that we seek in this world. Our corollary to that with respect to trust is, let us create the trust that we seek in this world by starting with ourselves, trusting ourselves, and by giving others a person they can trust. And then as we lead out with that, we also lead out with trust. We're smart about it, not a blind trust, but it's a smart trust. But like Chris Zane and like Tony Shea of Zappos.com and Chris Zane and Zane's Bike Shop, we lead out with trust. We trust our customers, we trust our partners, our suppliers smartly, and they respond to it. They reciprocate it. They give it back. Trust is reciprocal. When you give it, people receive it and they return it. When you withhold it, they withhold it. So if we want to end a low trust world where everything is spiraling downward, a vicious downward cycle of distrust and suspicion, creating more distrust and suspicion, best way to end that is to counteract it. Lead out, extend the trust with clear expectations, with accountability. So it's smart trust, but extended. Most people respond well to it. They rise to the occasion. They'll prove themselves worthy of it, and they'll return it. They'll reciprocate it. They'll give it back. And you can find yourself beginning a virtuous upward cycle of trust and confidence, creating more trust and confidence. And so in either direction, trust is contagious. Let's make it contagious in the positive direction. And let's build this trust. And we do it by first looking in the mirror and starting with ourselves. So that would be my advice to leaders, to people, to entrepreneurs everywhere, is don't wait on the world to make itself trustworthy. You give the world a leader, an entrepreneur that they can trust.
And my advice back to the audience would be, get a copy of Smart Trust, read it, apply it, and more importantly, share it with the people that you care about the most. Share it with your team. I think it's an outstanding book. And Stephen, I'm very grateful. Thank you for the privilege of speaking with me and our audience today.
Thank you, Hutch. It's a real privilege for me to be on with you and with all that you do and what you represent. You're someone that Greg and I trust. And as a result, we are honored to have this opportunity to be with you and to reach this audience. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you. And on behalf of the outstanding folks that work with us, thanks for being with us. I'm Michael Hutchison. Go out there, keep making things happen. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.